Okay, then we start again. Thank you for staying with us, ladies and gentlemen. We have our last panel concerning the tools we need to develop new applications more efficiently, so a bit more practical.
Im Livestream ist aber noch das Video. Jetzt.
Pardon? Okay. You know, it's a bit, we take about 15 seconds for the live stream. Live mean for the others, you know. In Zoom, it's a bit earlier. So we have our youngest chair, Bernhard Waltl, a doctor of informatics. Today, for the 2 days, the only one who is not close to the risk group of Corona, actually. So we selected him because he's good. He has done a lot of work in our discipline. He studied informatics, but also social sciences, philosophy, so he's a quite good background. He understands also lawyers, I can say, because I spoke with him quite many times, actually. And it's very interesting also in the legal discipline. And his main work is using the tools on text analysis for legal applications. That I might say he's now doing much more. He's moved to BMW research from Technical University of Munich, sorry. And he is using these tools also for business environments. And he's also active, as far as I know, is in ethics. So he has many interests and they use him as much as they can use to that. So for me, that's the introduction of Bernhard Waltl, a wonderful, good researcher, so we'll see much more from him. And he's also a co-founder of the Liquid Legal Institute. He will speak about that himself. And then he will give an introduction and also introduce the panelists. So, Bernhard, you have the floor. And also for the other participants, don't forget, after the wrap-up, there's music, as usual in Vienna. Bernhard, please.
Eric, thank you very much for this kind introduction. And also to Stefan Eder and all the other ReMeP organizers for kindly inviting us for this highly interesting panel. I have with me, virtually with me, close friends and colleagues from the legal tech domain. And we are very happy to speak about a super interesting topic, namely the legal tech applications and the future of legal tech applications, which is a nice roundup to the academic discussion that we have heard in the previous panel. I have prepared some slides. I hope that you can see them. This is basically the overview of who is with me in the panel today. I'm very happy that excellent persons from German and also other countries have joined the panel. I would kindly ask to introduce each and every panelist by himself. I have them here on almost alphabetical order. And I would kindly ask you, Baltasar, say a couple of sentences to introduce it to the community here at the ReMeP.
Thank you, Bernhard. I'm delighted to be on this great conference. My name is Baltasar. I'm mostly German, grew up here, but I have also a Slovenian background. And similarly, in my professional field, I worked as an IT guy for several years before, while studying law. And since 2010, I'm lawyer, self-employed since 2016, and also very active in the Liquid Legal Institute and legal tech domain. Thank you.
Next in the list, I think it's not shown again. It's you, Eva, please.
Thank you, Bernhard. Again, also thank you from my side for the invitation. My name is Eva Gardyan. I'm an attorney by training and a long-term in-house general counsel, division counsel, and compliance officer, and the last 5 years data privacy officer. I think I hope to be able to contribute because I've been dealing with legal tools and legal technology for, gosh, at least 8 years, with introducing contract management systems, contract generation systems, and also lately a data privacy platform that contained what we nowadays would call legal applications for the generation of documents, policies, and all kinds of other helpful tools. So hope to bring that perspective into the discussion. Thank you.
Great. Christian, you're next.
Thank you, Bernhard. I'm Christian Sageder. I am Managing Director of the CYBLY GmbH. We are a legal tech company here in Austria, and we have several legal applications running. Most famous one is the mobile REES application, which is the mobile version of the Austrian REES, which is developed on our side. On the other hand side, we have platforms like Open Laws, which provides access, simultaneous access to different legislation in different countries at the same time. So you don't have to search within different databases. And on top of it, we are developing individual tools for our clients to solve legal processes.
Thank you, Christian. Karla, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here. Thank you very much, Bernhard, for inviting me to the panel. I am an educator by training and work as a agile coach, scrum master, and come from the tool and product development side. I use design thinking and design sprints in order to help clients find, or actually developers find the products that the clients need and use processes that are efficient and at the same time very adapted to the changing needs of our VUCA world today. Thank you.
Thank you, Karla. Michael.
Yes, thank you, Bernhard, and thanks as well for having me in this panel. Yeah, my name is Michael Zollner. I'm currently Managing Director of LOD Lawyers on Demand. We are one of these so-called alternative legal service providers offering flexible legal resources, but also managed services and consulting, also with a tech focus. In my previous career, I was working as a lawyer in Germany and living in Munich, both in-house and in private practice. So I came across a lot of legal tech solutions in both worlds in the past years, and I'm currently also part of a team who's developing a computable contract solution. So I have some interest in these topics, but I'm not a computer scientist, only a lawyer.
Thank you, Michael. The last panelist to present himself, Lutz.
Thank you, Bernhard, and thanks for being on the panel. I'm a lawyer by training, as Michael, no informatics guy, never studied it. I've been an attorney at law in private practice for about 25 years now, and as partner in two big international firms, and interrupted my career just for 2 years as an investment banker, where I acted really in investment banking. But this doesn't mean helpful for our panel today, and still in the private practice of law.
Great, thank you. I will switch back to the few slides that I have prepared. When we speak about legal tech applications, I think we all agree that this hype on legal tech applications started 7 to 8 years ago. When people ask me, I always refer to these two books. I think Richard Susskind really set a stage when he sketched really a fancy future for lawyers and a bright future for technology. He picked up many questions and he summarized them nicely in a book which is called The End of Lawyers, ? Rethinking the Nature of Legal Services. Is it really about replacing lawyers by technology? Is it really about replacing in-house legal consultancy work by technology? I don't know. Based on what we see currently, I think we can all say we do not see this happening as of now. But what we do see is that there is a large spectrum of applications which are from year to year summarized in so-called legal AI landscapes. They show all the different technology areas in which methods from computational technology, algorithmic, data structures, data analytics, text analytics can really support lawyers, either in-house or in law firms. These methods reach from e-billing systems to contract drafting, e-discovery, contract review, contract due diligence, legal research, contract management. We briefly heard about speaking Eva briefly on that, and they also reach to expertise automation. So this is really a large spectrum, but the question is, and this is what we would try to answer with the panelists today, what can we expect from the near future, and what do we need also in terms of preparation and in terms of reference, for example, data, such that those AI landscapes become true, if we want them to become true, and also not only looking at technology, but also asking ourselves what methods, what kind of working models of collaboration practice, for example, do we need for those tools to be successful. We at the Liquid Legal Institute, and a couple of the panelists are already a member of the Liquid Legal Institute, we are pursuing this question together with our members. And in order to do that, we identified that technology or the usage of technology is not only about buying a software or hiring a couple of software engineers that do some tooling, that do some implementation stuff, and then every problem that can be solved with technology is solved. But it's more a full transformation. It's the so-called digital transformation that requires much more than just tooling, but also a change in mindset, adaptation to new collaboration models, but also customer experience, end user perspectives, and all these, I would call them now buzzwords that you have heard on some other occasions, maybe. I don't want to speak too much. I would rather ask our panelists, and I would kindly start with Eva and Lutz, as you seem to be very experienced with the legal practice, to speak a little bit about, based on your experience, based on your maybe also gut feeling, what would you say, what makes a legal tech application successful?
If I may start, I think the best starting point for a success of a legal application and technology is a true pain point to be addressed. So not starting with something that you imagine that may one day create mystery and magic, but really have something concrete on your desk. At least that has been the driver in my legal departments when we looked for technological solutions. Because the push for the legal application and its success doesn't only come from its features and what it can actually deliver, but it comes from the fact that colleagues are willing to change their way of working and adopt a tool and really make it usable and useful for them. And thus, when you start from a pain point, you have a chance to get people on board because they can see the value, or they hope for the value at minimum, and then adopt the tool. So the pain point is the first thing, and it should be a pain point if it's an in-house legal department, definitely for the lawyers. But it should always, at least that's my conviction, be useful for the business, either because they can use themselves as well, or because they benefit from the effects, meaning the lawyer is available for other stuff that they need him for, or he or she doesn't have to run after a lawyer but can pick up something on demand. So the pain point which serves a need is for me the absolute starting point to start with, and not just something that looks fancy and is colorful or promises to be the future.
I definitely share that view, and in particular, I would add a psychological issue in this. This is lawyers by nature are very conservative and think everything must be done by themselves. And this is, they only believe in any progress, in technical progress, when they see there's some pain and there's a real merit in it, using this. For, I think, an in-house department, by the way, likewise for counsel to companies as an attorney, it's very important, of course, that you have a reliable tool, because otherwise you run a liability risk as a lawyer who advises his clients. It's, of course, the liability risk is obvious, but I think for even an in-house lawyer with his internal clients or her internal clients, it's also a pain if the internal lawyer, in-house counsel uses a tool that's not reliable, because then his internal clients will tell him, hey, what crap are you using? And that product is something I can't use. And I don't want to go into more detail for that very first round, I think, but this is really pain and reliability. This is really what should be the fundamental issues that must be fulfilled, satisfied to make a tool successful.
Thank you. Speaking about the pain point, you both agreed on that the pain point is so important. Karla, you as a legal design expert, as an educator, how do you, together with clients, identify pain points?
We do user research, and we do interviews, and we get out of the building like you would with Lean, but we go through a systematic process in order to identify what the actual problem is. And with design thinking, it's a 6-step double diamond process where we use different kinds of methods and thinking processes and creativity in order to first really understand the problem, the pain point, and then to work from there to develop a series of solutions which are then filtered down into a prototype, which we test. And I think that's something that's really important when you're using new kinds of legal tech software devices, is that you have some kind of a testing metric. You can measure value in different ways. And this is something that's often not done. And it can also boost that reliability that Lutz was just talking about. It can be shown that certain new, in this case, tools bring advantages in measurable ways. And just to it's about working differently and collaborating differently, so this kind of process actually works, because it's also for people working in teams, especially lawyers, really new and unusual. But the more they can trust this process, that it's really something that has a lot of, it's systematic, it's also about thinking, and it's something that they can also become, learn to use as another type of collaboration tool as well. There's a different way of working.
Christian, when you hear about that, you as a successful founder, as someone who actually codes and develops software, do you speak with customers? Do you identify their pain points? Are you aware of their pain points, and how do these interviews, or how does this input influence your product?
Yes, we talk to our customers, and I think as it is for a normal project and in the software area at all, independently if it's a legal software, you have to really talk to your customers, and also on your customer side, there must be the willingness to support the project, because if this is not given, then this project will fail, even if you have the best software at all, because they will find every time something against your product. So this willingness to change the process inside the company must also be available, and you need the right stakeholders in for this kind of project. In another thing is, I think you have to be very transparent or manage the expectations, what a software can help you and what the software will not can do. Because currently we have a lot of different software on the market, but you really have to manage the expectation what this can do, because even if, for example, we sometimes hear certain questions if the software can do this and that, and then I say, even if a lawyer would have his difficulties to decide, currently a software cannot give you an expert result or something like this. So software can currently, in this current stage, support you to find the right answer, but it will not give you the answer, because the answers mainly come maybe from the code or from somewhere else, but the software cannot do this.
Michael, you mentioned in your introduction that you are working on some kind of a smart contract system. Which pain point do you solve, and can you make this system so reliable that people can actually trust it?
We will see whether we can make it so reliable. Which problem do we solve? Maybe before I answer this question, about the question, what makes the legal tech application successful, I would like to add one aspect, which is, I totally agree with Eva and Lutz. It's about solving problems and creating tools that are really used. We all see this in practice. You see this, we see this when we sit together with clients. They have, I don't know, document assembly tools, and in practice everybody directly goes and asks the lawyer instead of using them. But when we talk about problems, what we have here in the panel is a very typical round discussing about legal tech. It's large corporates and enterprises who are having a legal department, it's lawyers, it's us new law providers. But I think one aspect must not be forgotten. It's what problem do we actually have in our legal system? You know this, Bernhard, what I always claim. We actually have a massive problem that our legal systems in most jurisdictions are not really just and fair. We don't have access for anybody to the law. We don't have, we have a massive complexity problem. And I think we must not forget when we develop legal tech tools that we have big problems and challenges with the increasing complexity, the increasing discrepancy between people who can afford getting legal advice and people who cannot afford getting legal advice, which is a massive amount of people, consumers and small corporates. And I think that's the main benefit of legal tech, to think about ways how we can make the legal system more just and fair again. And that would be, for me, a really successful legal tech application. Coming back to your question, what are we want to do? We are creating a tool, computable contract management tool, which allows for to represent contracts as semantic data objects. And what problem would that solve? Again, the advice, legal advice, if we talk about contracts, drafting, negotiation contracts, is expensive. And it's something that you have to afford if you want to get it. And we believe that any step further in more efficient ways, and maybe more cheaper and faster ways to manage the contract life cycle is in semantics and what we already discussed or heard just before. And that's an area we are a little bit coping with.
That's super exciting. I always like this contract analytics and smart contracts domain. But I was also ask Baltasar, what is, from your experience, you've seen the in-house legal world, you now know the world, how lawyers practice. What is your experience? What makes a legal tech application successful, and what are the main obstacles? What to consider?
I think the circle closes to what Eva and Lutz said in the beginning. It starts with the pain point, especially, and the pain point must be solved in the way that it's usable. So, for example, we already, somebody said that we have a panel with many big organizations here. As soon as an organization is smaller, it becomes way more difficult to educate people about a tool, and it needs to be kind of self-accessible. So a user needs to find the path through the tool her himself, and I think the threshold is very high. And I've seen, for example, when we look at a topic like contract drafting or actually applying templates to single cases, one of the companies that is successful in Germany, Lawlift, is successful especially due to the ease of usability, whereas other products are more powerful. This is easier to use. So it really depends on the concrete issue you want to solve and the potential you have to invest in that. For example, I had a small idea as a two-person entity. It was difficult to implement because the best approach to use it is just too expensive. It would have cost at least 10,000 euros, and I cannot use that for a pilot, evidently. So kind of close the circle to what users need and to make it more accessible, which Mike, you said already.
You have touched on an interesting point that I want to follow up, namely resources. I think, and we can discuss this now, is it only an excuse from startups? They always say, well, we do have not enough money, we don't have enough data, we don't have enough, I don't know, whatsoever. I would like to know, I would like to understand what resources would you see, what are must-haves for teams, for startups, for also enterprises that move into the field? What do you need to create successful legal tech applications? We had the panel before, we were a lot about ontologies, also briefly touched on data. What is your experience, Christian? You're right in the middle of the implementation of a very data-intensive tool. What are your resource requirements? What would you say? If you have also make wishes, what would you wish from the scientific community to develop for you or to provide to you?
I think it's on the one hand side, when you go get something from the scientific point of view, it's most of the time to bring it then to a product is most of the time a big step, because these scientific solutions are made for a certain environment, and to bring it into another environment with other data, it's most of the time difficult. And in general, if you go, for example, for legal applications, you will face immediately, there are a lot of legal applications in the market which are addressing, for example, English as language. And from a jurisdiction point of view, they are made mainly for the United States, maybe also for UK. But bringing them to Europe or even to Austria, Germany, or other countries will be much more difficult, because even there the data resources and all the tooling is not available, which you would have for English texts. So it starts really with simple things. So there is you had it in the previous panel, there is translation tools from English to German and so on. But if you go to other languages here in Europe, then immediately you have no good translations anymore. And again, also for data resources, for some natural language processing. There are trained models for recognition, for named entity recognitions, for example, which are working fine on an English text. But if you take a German model and take a German text, then it starts already that the recognition rate is much less than this one is for English. And I think here is this one, here's the difficulty. Most of this, all of this research is done in English because the population and everything is done also in English journals and so on. So everything is done for English, but most of the time other languages are not considered, for example. And then we have this, in the next step, we have Austria or Europe with its all different jurisdictions and with a top level jurisdiction from the European Union. And so it makes it much more difficult.
Yeah, there are a lot of open challenges. Maybe Eva, with your experience, you've seen successful rollouts of applications based on resources. What was required? What would you say?
I would say almost as always the right type of people and the right mix of people. In the applications we got rolling and really effectively working and being used and not just a nice PowerPoint, it was usually not exactly the people that you would think. So not necessarily the lawyers who were the most critical for the project, but those who were then supposed to work with the tool, which in my case, the one I'm thinking of right now, is a major compliance management tool where paralegals play a big role. What was successful for the implementation was that we had the right colleagues, in this case, the future users, involved from the start in the design, because they could describe how they do things now. And they could also describe, and this is probably music to the ears of Karla, how they wanted it in the future, and you just would help them to find that way. That was the first thing. And the second thing was, because we had the users involved from the start, they could also help us with the testing and the getting from the MVP to the final product, because they could tell us if the system was giving us something which wasn't 150% correct. So you didn't have to do abstract use cases that nobody could relate to, but they could feed the new tool as we were developing it with their use case and figure out whether something came out in the end that was correct or not. So the right people who are interested, again, the psychology that Lutz referred to earlier, that this was a success, but then in particular being involved from the very start to the final product. And maybe one other note, I referred to the right type of people. One of my major assets in one of my first digital projects was a medical doctor in my team who had come through code compliance. She had in her brain differential diagnosis, and she knew how to build those decision trees. And in my case, she wasn't trying to differentiate measles from pox or something. She was trying to differentiate different aspects of a code compliance contract. So somebody who is able to think in these types of helpful structures didn't have to be a lawyer, helped to design the tool, which in the end was part of the success, because that was so plainly done that everybody else could very nicely follow through.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for this remark. You touched upon many different aspects. Lutz, at the beginning you mentioned that there is this psychological issue, and speaking about resources, speaking about how to change, do law firms have the right incentives to go for legal tech applications? This might be an issue, how to motivate, how to get the buy-in. Then you also might solve the problem of resources.
This is like a look into a glass bowl, because principal incentive for a law firm, in particular when we're talking, and then you have to distinguish between the bigger and the smaller firms. I think for the bigger firms, the incentive nowadays is the disruption, that they risk a disruption of their customary process and business model, as many know from the Bucerius law study and so on. And there is hardly an incentive, I believe, that these firms easily change their model unless they are forced to change their model. And how are they forced? There are various factors you can think of. One of the factors is one firm, for instance, starts off with legal tech and then has a competitive pricing advantage, assuming the right reliability. And then the others are forced to also engage in that legal tech application, because otherwise they will no longer be able to offer their services at a competitive price level. However, you will see there's a very wide scope how these big firms approach it. We had a pitch last year with a DAX 30 company in Germany for some work to be done, and one lawyer there really showed up and only had a pencil with him and said, "This is my legal tech." Full stop. That was ridiculous. But still, there is still this belief in why should we use legal tech? It will not be able to solve. But on the other hand, and the other thing is leaving aside the competitive edge, that you will have possibly, perhaps in Germany less quickly, but I believe it will change, that you will have courts saying, if you have not used legal tech application, then I won't be willing to trust you. That is, I think in the US for compliance investigations, courts tend to say, if it's not already the established rule, that if you don't apply predictive coding and more advanced tools, then courts will not accept and your investigation results as being reliable enough. Because if you do investigations and do the search for responsive documents, if you haven't done that through the use of AI, then you will miss more than if you had used it. Yeah. And this, for instance, and I think I once attended a conference where on the panel somebody said, since 2010, we have never done an investigation again without predictive coding. And this, I know, I think here in Germany, predictive coding came up about 2014, 15 or something like that. But this will force you to use it. And then the big law firms will have to do it. And now I don't want to kind of hold a speech on that too lengthy. And for smaller law firms, the challenges are much more difficult because they, I think, in particular see on the one hand also that they are driven out of business, one point. But if that holds true, you can really discuss a lot about that. And the other point is the investment they have to make and whether they say, is it really worthwhile doing that? Mm-hmm. I think the market for legal tech currently is really, as it often happens, neglecting the more smaller businesses and to cater for their needs.
Mm. Michael, as you run a small business in the legal tech world, can you confirm what Lutz just said? And also maybe from your experience for lawyers on demand, how would you say, how does this fit in?
Well, I think I agree with Lutz. It's a little bit coming down to the Christensen's Innovators Dilemma, which is a book. I don't know whether anybody of you have read it, but I think it's still a good read. And the statement is a little bit that new innovations like that are at the beginning, you make less money with it, and they have to be developed with trial and error, and that's nothing which would fit in the big law world. For us, speaking now for me as managing director of Lawyers on Demand, we are comparatively small, but we have the benefit that we are not a regulated law firm. We have the benefit that we can try out things, that we have much more flexibility, pricing. We have a totally different reputation, which is also a thing for a big law firm. I think big law firms like the one Lutz is working for, you cannot afford going to your clients and say, well, we have a new developed technology, we want to test it first. It's a beta test with you. The second aspect is, if you would ask me, so far, the major law firms are still earning a lot of money. So their business model is very, very successful. Yeah? So that's, I also agree with Lutz. If there's no need, why would you want to change it at the moment? And these two aspects, innovator's dilemma, and at the moment it's still working, makes law firms probably not the primary candidates for innovation. And a funny note, I was talking to a colleague this morning, and he had a discussion with a legal tech startup in the US, and they said, in the US you won't get funding at the moment, especially, but even without Corona, if you have a tool which is addressed to law firms, but only if it's addressed to in-house departments, because it's difficult to sell legal tech to law firms. And I think that shows a little bit also this aspect.
It's very fascinating thought, really, about this ambivalence between in-house and the law firms. Karla, what is your experience with this? Was a market pressure? How is it perceived, and how does it also maybe influence the way how legal design solutions are discussed?
Before I address that, I'd like to say something about what I just heard about the process with trial and error, and that the larger law firms wouldn't go with a beta product to one of their clients. Of course not. You don't put a beta product in front of an important client, but especially the large law firms have to try things out and experiment, and also in a continual learning cycle. But they wouldn't necessarily test with people that are not involved. Whether that's just not good policy. So what I think is important to know is this idea of continual experimentation and innovation. Yes, it can also be that it is steered by a pain point, but it's also part of the change that we see all around us, and whether it's specific competitive pressure because another company has introduced something, or because of, for example, collaboration between different kinds of sectors, a law firm, and becoming more in tune with business models. I think that this kind of a mindset approach is absolutely important. And of course, that's what Christensen also talked about, is that innovation comes from a series of different kind of impetuses. And the point is to figure out where you want to go, what your needs are, and what kinds of needs do you want to solve for your end client down the line. Very often when we start an innovation process, we think we explore this problem space, is what you call it, and we make hypotheses. But very often these hypotheses at the beginning of the process are not what comes out at the end. You've got to also adapt and also using Scrum methodology, inspect and adapt continually. And this is a process of trial and error, which can be done in innovation labs. It can be done by smaller teams. And it can be, in a digital transformation, a mindset that many in the company have, that it's planning becomes not something that you do from A to Z. The planning becomes short-term planning, where you then review, have you actually achieved something that you had set out to do at the beginning of your cycle? So there's lots of different ways of approaching this, but right now this type of continual learning, or when things do go wrong at the end, for example, with a test, those are golden opportunities. When you figure out, when your client says, but this is, I don't need this, we normally say, because that's where you really learn, and that's where you can actually pinpoint and advance on a product in order to really develop something that creates value and solves a problem, and where the customer might be quite enthusiastic, for example. So that was pretty long, Bernhard. I don't remember what you asked me in the beginning, but that was important for me to talk about this process, which is definitely something that it's an approach. It's something that teams can use, and it's not something that you find a lot of in legal firms for a number of reasons. Also because the pressure isn't there. It is a change process, and it's not like psychologically, a psychology of people is, oh yeah, good, we get to change and do something new. This kind of a real embracing of change comes very often when there is some kind of pressure, and there's also a clear vision where this is going. Why should we have to do this? The purpose must be really clear for people who are involved.
Yeah. The original question was with regard to pressure, and I know that there are models who say, well, there's pressure from bottom up on a team, there might be pressure from top down, from outside in, or from inside out. This is also, by the way, something that we discuss in our digitalization guide from the Liquid Legal Institute. But maybe, Baltasar, I mean, you were successful in-house legal department. You see the world now from another perspective as a lawyer. Where do you see the market pressure arising? Do you agree with Lutz? There's not enough pressure yet, and only if there's certain areas in which we see the pressure in text analytics or due diligence, for example.
There is a strange perception about pressure, I think. If you listen into in-house departments, they will always tell you they're under pressure, but that doesn't mean the pressure you were talking about earlier is really there. It's not it's some perceived like work overload, but it's not enough pressure apparently to do something really. And what happened, it's a story. I once asked, in a time where we were totally overworked, my boss, let's have a look at our processes and see how we can make them better. And he said, we don't have time for that.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's kind of a typical human answer, in my view, but it's not the good answer here. We need to take that as an opportunity to improve. And the other aspect in-house departments, in my view, is that they don't have a business thinking often. They see themselves as cost center and debate headcounts instead of business value add, instead of measuring what they do, instead of having a clear picture of what they mostly even don't know what they exactly do. Like many in-house departments don't time track, and we had that in 2 departments I worked in. When we did it for some time to get some data, we were astonished that that all our assumptions were wrong. Like not totally wrong, but we were often 102 or 200% off, up or down. And I think we really need to address that more from a business integration and process perspective, and be open to change in general.
Yeah. So you in general, you agree with what has been said before. So
I would do so. Just the interesting thing is that the wording that has been used here is wording the lawyers use in a different. I totally agree with the wording. as it has been used. But often people say there is pressure where they actually, in our understanding, probably there is not enough apparently. Otherwise it would happen.
Fascinating. For the procedure, I would say that there's another point I would like to ask you. I would do another round, and then I would have a quick look at the comments and the questions from the audience that may have arisen in parallel. I mean, we were speaking, at least to my understanding, a little bit abstract now for legal tech applications. Where do we see chances? Where do we see risks, or what do we see prerequisites? I would like to know, what would you say from your individual perspectives, what are the most promising and specific fields of legal tech applications? If you would say, well, if I would have, like, I don't know, unlimited resources, if I could stop time now, I could develop a tool. Which tool would I develop? Because I'm pretty sure that I could sell it to the market. Baltasar, as you have had the virtual mic already, do you have an opinion on that? What would be an application where this would be a good move to implement?
It also depends on what exactly you use. Like, there is, for example, a huge need for small things, like probably some of the people in the audience know the Do Not Pay bot. I think it was a student who developed it, even in the UK, to a tool, a chatbot which you interacted, and its output was a letter you could send to the authority that issued a parking ticket to get that parking ticket reversed. But that was kind of pro bono work, and it was a huge success because we were actually lacking access to law in that field. Apart that, I don't think there is the huge field, because you need to find something where you have a more or less standardized process already. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we have to develop that standardized process first, and the tool afterwards. And all the fields which are formalistic are evidently easier to address, and therefore maybe earlier, although that doesn't reflect the actual need directly. It's more from a solution perspective than from a problem perspective.
Eva, what if you can make a wish? What would you work on? What would you work on? What would you have developed in your pocket in the place? Go buy it.
Yeah, definitely not one single application and one single product, but I would start to think in terms of a platform that is modular from the start, because many of the elements that facilitate at least the work for the in-house legal department come one after the other. So you start with one need: training on demand, on legal training, accessible to the client anytime he or she wants it, maybe even on a mobile device. Policies repository that somebody can pick up and read up on. A workflow that helps you to generate a privacy statement for your website without contacting the legal department. I think what for me would be the product is really modular based, and then covering the standard areas that an in-house legal function has, which is giving governance, so the policy bit, creating contracts, which is still the core of what very, very many legal departments do. Simple ones to complex ones, but namely the simple ones could go in there one after the other once the processes that Baltasar just referred to have been clarified. And then, of course, the training and other types of advice that legal departments give. So my ideal product is a platform that can be modularly enhanced with workflow components and with all those types of generation tools, be it policy generation or other type of contract or document generation that we need all the time in all kinds and shapes and forms across in-house legal work. And as far as I know, that doesn't exist yet. There are a couple of good examples, and I won't make any merchandising here, so I won't talk about providers, but in principle, there are a couple of those out there, but the basis idea of build something that can grow, so you don't wind up with a basket of a whole bunch of different providers that give you all kinds of tiny tools, because then the alignment of all of that is usually at least 2/3 the pain of having something plain which you can enhance. That would be my wish.
Sounds as if you have a product idea already in your mind.
Yeah.
Michael, what would be your wish, or would your platform be something that scales just in the way that Eva just sketched it? Speaking about contracts.
We are working on an MVP, so a small product, but if we would have enough money and resources, and I'm only part of a team working there. Yeah, my main job is Lutz and demand, but I heavily believe in the computable contracts and contract lifecycle management solutions, which cover the whole contract lifecycle. And we already heard in a former panel the term from black box to white box, and so there I believe in that semantics will be the future of contracting, and contracting is, from most legal departments, still the majority of the work. So that's where I would invest in, or would think about. A second remark is, I believe that there's also a lot of potential in legal tech, which is not legal tech, meaning for example, Microsoft 365. We have an offering where we advise clients building up their demand in legal technology in their existing landscape, Microsoft landscape. And you can actually, what we see is you can actually build up 90% of their demand, and there's a lot of potential. You don't need individual single legal tech tools for any and each process step. But for many companies, it's true that they can actually, leaving aside the regulatory aspect, where you're allowed to store data and so on. But apart from that, we have existing tools, great existing tools for workflow management, meta management, and so on, that you can build up in this landscape. And the third thing is what I mentioned at the very beginning. I think real potential would still be in consumer services. Yeah, giving access to law and legal services to people who do not get it at the moment, because it's just not. They would rather use Google the Google research than going to a lawyer who they have to pay 300 euros per hour. Yeah, and that's the third.
You mean like an end-to-end service, just as, I don't know, flight ride offers, for example?
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm. Karla, as you are very close to these innovation cycles, I mean, you're coaching in ideation. You see a lot of what is currently discussed in these applications. What do you see, or what would you like to see in the next 3 years in terms of legal tech applications? Platforms or access to justice? Or
I was pretty excited about that platform idea, and the access to justice is something that I know because Stanford Legal Tech Lab, they were one of the first to create apps in this area, access to justice. For example, things that just were not done before, using apps, and people that were affected by the flood in Louisiana, in New Orleans, that they could easily get information about where they had to go to get emergency funding and also legal support. That was a number of years ago, and things are slowly, I think, slowly evolving, perhaps more in the States than here, I venture to say. And I was thinking that you might be asking me this question, and I participated in a virtual global design sprint. And there we created products and services that revolved around Corona issues. And so that was something that I think in this particular time has a lot of validity. It had to do also with supporting people who had, because it was virtual and global, we had people from throughout the world, and there were a number of cultures who did not understand the threat of Corona. And one of the products that we developed was creating a platform, how people that didn't have access to authorities and not a lot of clear let's say, education would still be informed of the difficulties of Corona. That had a social aspect, it had humanitarian aspects. We did not have a lawyer on the team. So there were also hypotheses there. In any case, I think that there's a lot of potential for using these easy, seamless types of products. However, I also see that on the other hand, if you build a lot of little products, you have a lot of repetition, a lot of waste, and the idea of making a platform, like what Eva just said, I find that really quite intriguing. So without going into any more detail, I'll just leave it at that.
Speaking about concrete applications and platforms, Lutz, you've been rather specific in your comment before on was it, well, we have NLP or AI to support due diligence. Is there anything in addition, or would you support this idea of having a platform as that really fosters legal tech innovation for the next years?
I think this is very interesting because in advance to this session here, I was thinking of what would be my desire, my wish list or so as well. And I think currently there is hardly any platform that consolidates various aspects, for instance, of the contract drafting or so. On the other hand, it's very difficult to create such a platform from the outset because the typical platform would be something that is highly sophisticated. And finally, I think I would believe currently this will be more a jigsaw that you put together at some point. And then it's very important that everything fits into each other. But finally, I think there should be a platform. And like you have that platform, for instance, when you do something in writing, nowadays everybody uses Word. Full stop, I think that it is. WordPerfect was banned out of the market by Microsoft. That is how life goes. And what Michael, I think, said before, I found very interesting because this was also one of my thoughts. Many lawyers, and Eva, please apologize if I say something that doesn't apply to your department or so. Many lawyers, again, are so conservative that they don't have the openness to have a look what the tools they already have on their computers can do. My feeling is, and this is now not the right example, but I think it's very illustrative, because when I worked at an investment bank, PowerPoint was the tool for doing presentations, and it was an innovative tool. For me, even now, 20 years later, it appears that lawyers see Microsoft PowerPoint as Word with big font, nothing more. And it's horrible when you look at that. With Excel, I think you still find 50 to 70% of lawyers being surprised that there are various sheets in Excel that a workbook consists of. A tremendous amount of sheets. Honestly, I also belong to that category until I joined the investment bank. Then I could use Excel, which for me is the best program I ever used. And so I think if you use what you already have as tools and applications, I think you don't need a lot of stuff that currently lawyers say, oh, it would be great to have a collaboration platform and blah, blah, blah. I think they don't know how powerful many tools are. And the other point also Michael mentioned, and I would stress that point as well, it's very important to have a look which is the target customer group you're looking at. For consumers, if you look to B2C, and then we're talking about Flightride or so, it's completely different from what the tools are big law departments, big law firms are looking for. And there, I think, finally, they will, and I find it honestly also much more exciting. It's more there you can test the real high intelligence product because they have the need for that. Also, I mentioned that before a little bit, for liability reasons one day, because they can't stick to working only with manpower. That's my strong belief. And just as an example, I mentioned investigations before, but there had been a reorganization project of a big German company, of a DAX company, and with a lot of hive downs, mergers, and blah, blah, blah. And then they had to find out, are there any change of control clauses in the agreements that are currently in one company? And then I got a call from a lawyer who was in charge of that, and he said, oh, we're talking about 1.5 million agreements. And then I said, okay, then have a look at tools like Kira, Luminance, whatever. I think they can be trained, and then you can do it with them. And the funny thing is, and then he said, but they want to charge us something, some million amount. And then I said, yeah, but if you do it with manpower, how long do you think it'll take you? Do you have the number of lawyers you will need to do that in a time frame that is acceptable? And how much will it cost? And then he all of a sudden said, oh, yes, you are right. And it's funny to see that, and how many lawyers think in a tunnel.
Yeah, super exciting topics that you touched upon. Actually, I would like to make a deep dive now into several things, but we would run completely out of time. And I would also hear your opinion, Christian, on the legal tech applications of the near future, about platforms, about standardization. We are having then a very technical discussion if we go deep down what are the prerequisites for that. But what is your opinion? What are the trends, or what would you wish?
I think I see two trends. The one is for this B2C applications like flight rides, which have this easy process, ease of access to law, and so on. So I think here it will continue that there will be new applications coming up in the near future for other areas. Currently, we have flight rides because there's money, but I think there will be other areas where companies will see money and will provide this. On the other side, I think also that the next generation of these applications must be some integrated or platform solutions. Because currently, if you have a contract management, you create contracts, you have a different system where you maintain all your data and so on. And another one where you check your compliance with legislation and so on. But if there is a change, you have again to look somewhere else. So I think that they have to integrate and to share data so that you get the benefits out of it. Otherwise, you still have multiple single applications which do not work together, and you have and the people have always to do the missing link. And I think it does not help the people also to solve their problem or to give a good counsel or something like this.
If I add from my perspective, I totally agree with what has been said. And actually, when it comes up to the decision make or buy software, the integration scenarios play a huge role. So the way how to programmable, or what are the available programmable interfaces, the APIs, and all these technical issues. These become highly relevant when it comes up to whether to buy the software or whether to not buy a software. In parallel, I have had a look at the questions, and from the audience, we received a couple of, and there is one which fits particularly well to what we've been discussing within the latest round. And I will just read it. So Legal tech products at the moment work in silos. Silos do not interact. The question is now, how do we get to applications that share data, interact, have APIs, and do fit into business processes?
You just answered that before.
Well, actually, I fully agree. But how do we get there? Is it companies like BMW or others that put a pressure on the vendors and say, we no longer buy your software without APIs? Would that be a way forward, or would it be a way forward to have like the vendors consolidating in consortia? Say, well, look, we all just benefit from each other if we offer or if we expose APIs that you consume from my contract lifecycle and I consume from your, I don't know, customer relationship tool. What's your impression on that? Who wants to give it a try? What do you think?
Okay.
Baltasar was raising his hand. Christian is starting to speak. I would say Christian and then Baltasar, please.
Okay, fine. I think there will be an integration to the big tool vendors like Microsoft, or let's say even for Google applications and so on. So because there are already several interfaces, even for the bigger CRM system, SAP or any other on the market, they provide interfaces to integrate with. So for certain areas, they're already from the bigger vendors, there are interfaces where you can integrate with. But on the other hand side, there are, I think, a lot of information is not standardized. But again, we come to this one slide from the previous session. We have 14 standards. Let's make a new integrated one. Oh, we have now 15 one. So I think this is not the easiest one, because most of the time a standard is always something which has to be agreed. And I was in the past, I was working in standardization too, and this is a long process. So standardization normally takes years. So I was, for example, working for the NFC standardization, and I was going with them for I think for 5 years. And this was like, oh, we have an idea, and after 5 years, yes, we still have an idea. And now I left this already now, I think 10 years, and 15 years later, we see the applications now more and more using this functionality. And I think this is also for other for standards, also in for here in the legal environment. If we look for document standards, which there is already a lot of work done by different researchers and here, but to get this into the products, I think it will take still quite a long time.
Baltasar?
I can just agree with you, Christian. There is one example in a good way of being quicker. It was working in the lighting industry, and there a consortium formed to figure out which of the existing standards would be best suitable for certain business applications. So what the consortium did was actually just recommend a standard. And that was the standard the industry went by later, and took about a year. So it was realistic. And besides that, maybe it comes back to the question we discussed before about business value and integration. Partially, people don't see, and that I can connect to what you said, Lutz. The perspective is missing. That it might be expensive to standardize, but how expensive is it not to build interfaces? So if we kind of make that present, it may come naturally, and I think big players will play a role. And on the other hand, networks will play a role. Like I actually was present when somebody out of the Legal Hackers Network brought 2 smaller companies in the legal tech field together and said, talk to each other. You have, you're in similar fields, and your tools would be more valuable if you would interact. And I think that's another thing. We need more networks and more exchange, so we kind of surface what is already there. Don't reinvent the wheel.
So more ReMePs, Stefan,
Yeah.
if you can hear us. There are also other questions, I was thinking about raising this question also by myself, and also now that we have two questions in the direction of the lawyers and their skill sets, lawyers and their training, lawyers and their educations. There's one comment, very short to the point: lawyers need to improve to work efficiently with tools and technology. What do you think? Is the education still the right one? What needs to be changed? How to prepare the lawyers or the students best for the legal practice? Let's to give it a try.
Well, one thing, having done a little bit of work at the university, I noticed that teamwork is something that's not practiced much when students are learning to become lawyers. This type of networking, collaboration, sharing of information, and that the team has a concerted effort in order to produce a result together. This is something that's not propagated very much, this idea that it's not you or me, but it's us. And you see that in many ways, and I think that's something that could definitely be improved upon, because people will only share and collaborate when they understand that this is also something for them as well. And it's not all about the single person, but that there's a benefit when they, and a larger benefit, whether it's for the client or for their team or for learning and growth when they actually share their resources. So I can offer that as something that I've had experience with at the university. And I know there are certain single initiatives, I would have to say, that try to open this up. And also, also the idea of approaching things with a different mindset is the very tender beginnings of showing what the use is and why that is a future skill. And you could also talk about different types of problem solving, that it's not all about the analytical part, but there's also other aspects of how we think, abductive thinking or diversion thinking that can also play an important role in problem solving. So there are things that could change at that level, but also if you want to go back, also we can go back to school. But I'm not going to go all the way back to school. But at the university, that was something that that I've been exposed to.
Eva, you're raising your hand directly, and Lutz, you were virtually raising your hand. Maybe Eva, you want to start, and then
just very close to what Karla just said. I think it's interesting that you picked this collaboration theme. I mean, if we look at the traditional way lawyers are being educated and in particular graded, it's on the basis of individual performance. Whether it's in Germany, in France, anywhere, it's rankings, it's gradings, all of that kind of stuff. I think what has already helped tremendously is to bring in collaborative opportunities into the learning environment. So if you look at the moot courts and other types of joint efforts where people start to understand then they can be better together than alone. That's the one point I wanted to make. So there is need for this collaboration, but I think there's also a need to reflect more how we do our work. We are so focused on what did the highest court say? How do we best formulate or what do we actually say in a contract? What should a clause look like? All of these content-driven things. The reflection about the methodology, how we work, and how a department is organized. how you best staff resources in the resource mix to solve a certain recurring issue versus an individual high caliber contract transaction, for example. The mere reflection on how to best organize yourself as a department is nothing that I am aware of is being actually trained at least early enough, so that lawyers naturally think about this. They may be good at optimizing their own calendar if possible and go through individual work efficiency training, but the way our departments are organized is very little at the top of people's mind from my experience. It's changing, but in the past, at least, that's the way I've seen it.
Thanks. Lutz?
Actually, the one point that has already been made twice, basically, that's the attitude of collaborating. That is really a point that lawyers really apparently can't do. I don't know why, but it's very difficult for them to understand. And honestly, I don't want to say that I'm the great collaborating guy. It also has to do perhaps at some time that our product, if you work on a contract or so, that you have to highly concentrate and then you work and are in your own world and blah, blah, blah. And the other thing Eva alluded to a little bit is really the training of lawyers. I think there it lacks a lot of skills that nowadays are very important. And fortunately, unfortunately, I think that is something where I don't know, even in the US, the training system, the universities are not focused enough on to what extent the environment has changed. And now speaking for Germany, the students are being taught a lot of stuff, and until their second exam, they have to do all the 3 areas of law: public law, criminal law, civil law. Why can't they decide after the first exam that they are old enough then to say what they really want to do? One issue. And we have not been able to change that. The other thing is, when you talk to some lawyers, and this is not a legal tech issue, but it's again an example from outside legal tech, when you talk to a lot of lawyers, they are surprised that a balance sheet on the bottom has 2 identical numbers. It's incredible. I never understood. But it is so, because they never cared for accounting things, even though it's so important. And I think that's a commonplace thing. They have to know it, full stop. And the same is with legal tech, that they have to get some affinity to use legal tech, to use these tools, and that they at least get some essential training on how to program, or what it need to be a lesson course, but better understand. And it's surprised me a lot that, for instance, when I met you, Bernhard, that at the TU Munich, people, the students, the academic people, know more about the law than the legal the students at the LMU in Munich know about informatics, or the professors there. And it's really, and one citation again, sorry for that PowerPoint. I talked to a professor at the LMU and he said, I'm deeply impressed how tech-akin my students are. They can even use PowerPoint. So that's my statement.
Meanwhile, Michael has virtually raised his hand. He also has.
Yeah, just one additional comment to that. If you look at the legal education, I don't know the system in Austria, but if you look at the Anglo-American system, or also in Germany, there is actually a tradition to educate lawyers, not purely in law, but also in other areas. I mean, we had this Studium Generale, where at least in theory, in the Anglo-American world, to my knowledge, you first have to study something else before you can go to law school. So I also share the opinion of Eva and Lutz and the others that I think we should build up on this, and by nature, lawyers should know more than merely the statutes, and there's a lot of skills, soft skills that you would need, and computer science. I think there's a value in saying that all lawyers would benefit if knowing at least what computer science are doing and how the computers are working, and having at least basic skills in programming languages.
Great. I do see that the moderators are preparing already for the music, which was going to be played afterwards. I think we have 5 more minutes, and I would like to take this last 5 minutes for a brief final statement from each panelist. Before then, I will have some final remarks, which will close the session. And I will just ask any one of you to start. If there's someone wants to voluntarily start, please feel free. Otherwise, I will just go through you as I see you here on my screen. And the first one is Baltasar. What is your final statement? What is your conclusion about this last 1.5 hours?
I think the bottom line is quite easy. With the tools we need is more collaboration and more interdisciplinary views and change of perspective. And I think it's great that we have at least 2 non-lawyer panelists here. Yeah, so love discussing with you, and thank you for all your insights.
Thank you, Baltasar. Eva.
Yeah, maybe to reiterate one topic that I touched on before, but I think which is key. When wanting to make advantage in legal technology, really reflecting on what we being lawyers, what we actually do, and what would be helpful is a key requirement. Because otherwise we wind up in just adding, one little application after the other. But it's about the more holistic approach to what we generate as work products, but also what we need to offer our clients. And if we get that client centricity and our own user centricity into the picture, then we stop collecting little applications, and then we think more in a holistic approach with an entire process that then can be defined in smaller elements. But in principle, stepping back and looking at our concrete user needs as lawyers, in-house counsels, and the clients is probably the first thing to do to get us rolling in the right direction and stop being overwhelmed by a mountain of possible already in the market applications that people just get frustrated about because they don't know where to start.
Thank you. Lutz?
I would put it in very short and say lawyers must learn to look over the rim of their plate, and customers should demand that from them.
That's good. Christian?
I would say that we have really to think more in integrated solutions than which cover the whole process from the beginning to the end, and not only picking a single process step out without connections to the other systems.
Michael?
My final statement would be, if you come back to the question, what do we need to develop good legal tech applications, is we must not forget the legal environment. We discussed this a lot. I think we need, I don't know the situation in Austria and Germany, we need a new legal landscape. We have to rethink our professional laws. We need more flexibility for legal tech providers to offer services than we have at the moment.
Thank you, Michael. And Karla, what is your takeaway message?
Legal tech is not just technology, but it is the willingness to question processes, the willingness to question and employ collaboration And it is really about people over process.
Thank you. So we are now at the very end of our panel discussion. I hope that everyone else enjoyed the discussions as much as I did. We started with pain points, moved over to skills and platforms, applications, standards. So we touched upon many things. My head is full of impressions, of ideas that I want to think of. With you here in the panel, with you also in the audience. Thank you very much for participating. I think especially events like this ReMeP, where computer scientists, software engineers, legal experts are brought together and discuss eye to eye, openly, transparently, and constructively, really foster innovation in legal tech. I don't know what the next successful legal tech application will be that we see on the market, but yeah, very much looking forward to develop it with all of you. Have a great evening. I hand back to Stefan Eder. Thanks to everyone in the panel, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Bernhard, and your panel. That was really excellent.